launch into line. Line is really basic. When we handwrite or print something, we're using line. We're starting at point A to point B. When we doodle, we're using line. So line is something that we pretty much automatically do. Give a toddler a crayon and he's making lines all over the place. Lines are fun. Sometimes we stay within the lines, which is good if you're driving on the freeway, and sometimes we color outside of the lines, which is good when you're trying to be innovative and creative and come up with new ideas. So there are times to be to have certain kinds of lines, and there's times to have other kinds of lines. So lines are very important to our existence. Basically, there's three types of line: inscribed, implied, and psychological. An inscribed line is anything that you can actually see. It's the line that you can make. So you pick up a pencil or a pen or a crayon or a tablet stylus, and you can draw, or you can write, or you can sketch or scribble. So Durer picked up his pen and drew this piece of foliage, and it's all line. And then another panel cartoon is all line as well. Even the lettering and the signature is linear. And of course, notice the frame of reference around it. This has a frame of reference too, in that we understand the edges of this drawing versus the background that it's on. And here we have a line. This line will always be with us through this course. Implied line is created by alignments of elements within a design. There's a common, everything lines up in a row, so it's really in order and it's really neat. So I have indicated in the Mouchat drawing and also in this page layout from a textbook the alignments some of the alignments that are happening. And alignments help bring order into a design. They help you unify everything in a design. So we notice that the text is aligned to the left, but it's not aligned on the right. It's ragged over here. But notice the bottom of this block of photos lines up with the bottom of the text box here. And the top of the photos lines up with the top of the text box here. And we can draw a straight line down here and down here. And we can draw, again indicated here by the purple line, there's a line coming straight down indicating that everything is butting up against a left margin. So implied line is understood, and we understand it by how elements are arranged within the design. Then there's psychological line. The textbook will call this psychic line. I use the word psychological. They are interchangeable. Psychological is an understood connection between two or more elements. The connecting element does not need to be in the picture plane. If we're looking at the Raphael drawing, which is all line, he is psychologically connecting with something outside of the picture plane. Everybody else is psychologically connecting with him. Everybody's looking at him, so he becomes the focal point because he's the focus of everybody within the design, and that causes you, the viewer, to look on the scene and also focus on him. So lots of psychological line. This guy might be looking at you, or he might be looking at him. If we look at the Picasso, we have a couple standing, could be brother-sister, could be husband-wife, boyfriend-girlfriend, but they're standing near enough each other that the acquaintance is a little more than casual, and it looks like they've been in casual conversation. They seem to be outdoors. He's got his hat on, so we have, by virtue of details, which are drawn with line, inscribed line, there's a story being told here. But look at his gaze. He is gazing over her head out of the picture plane to somebody or something over there. Something's caught his attention. At the same time, she's not looking in that direction. She's looking at you, the viewer, and probably saying, what do you want? What are you looking at? do I know you, whatever, you could put like talk bubbles and caption this. But so there's a psychological connection that she's making with you, the viewer, and that will draw you in. So you are no longer just an observer, you are engaging with the person in the pictorial space. So psychological line is very useful. A direct gaze is very compelling to the viewer. Notice also in both of these the use of inscribed line, the actual line, and they're drawn, of course, very differently in very different styles. Raphael was Renaissance and Picasso was, 19th, 20th century painter. So there's a few centuries between them, but they're both using line. They're both using color in terms of black and white, which, by the way, are colors. And they're both using implied line and psychological line. Let's look at the implied line in the Raphael piece. See his hand to elbow to shoulder and the muscle picking up here, and there's a movement in the hair and the muscle here, and then to this elbow and to this forearm and across the top of his garment. That is an implied line. That's a connection. All of those forms are lined up along a common boundary. There's a sense of implied line here in the architecture. The architectural detailing here goes, behind the column and picks up, so we understand the continuation of things. And there's a common horizontal direction of that. But notice the implied line here goes across the scroll work on the architectural piece, and then also aligns with the bottom of the door jamb. So that's one implied line. Notice the back of the thigh here, take it straight up, runs over the finger, the neck, and straight up the column. Notice also this, from here to here to here to here. That's an implied line. All the guys' heads, except for this guy, are lining up. Actually, this guy kind of sticks above it as well too. But everybody here kind of lines up with this architectural element. Let's see. This direction is reiterated by this direction, and this direction, and this direction, and this direction. There's an implied line here. So all throughout this, there are implied lines. So we have inscribed line, psychological line, and implied line. Same thing here, implied line. You can make a nice S-curve here. Notice how the hand works into the belt and comes up into the other hand here. Notice how her forearm and hand line up with his forearm. So implied lines help us make connections between elements, help organize space, help line things up and bring order to a space, and also structurally will lend toward rhythm. So line does a lot. We can describe form, we enclose space, we can divide space with it. Graph paper is a great example of dividing space using line. Line will connect one element to another. Line will control the viewer's eye through a composition or through a design space. If we were working three-dimensionally, line controls both the lines of sight and a person's navigation through or around a space. Line creates a sense of movement. I mentioned to create line you have to move, so there's always a movement issue with line. If you have to move in a direction. So line is very much related to direction, and because it's related to direction, your compositional voice will either be passive or dynamic. Passive meaning still and quiet, or dynamic meaning energetic with movement. And yeah. We use inscribed line in various ways. There's basically two types of inscribed line that we deal with overall. One is contour, which describes edges, and the other is gesture. So when we're going to draw or sketch something out, we're basically using line to describe the edges of form. And there will be interior forms such as the eye, the eyelid, the nose, and exterior edges, which will be the ear and the collar here and the outline of the shoulder, the cheekbone here, and this line here. But everything else inside the total form is an interior contour. So describing the edge of the lapel here, that's an interior contour. Describing the edge of the shirt, that's an interior contour. The mouth is an interior contour, but the cheek is an exterior contour. Then we have lost and found contour, which is part of the expression of inscribed line, especially in this drawing. Found contour is that which is actually visible, but there's areas of where the contour kind of breaks. There's a break in the line, and that's where we lose the contour and the form that's being described actually merges with the background. And so we see lost contour here and right in here and over in here. Notice also how line can be used to build up shadow and tonal quality. Gesture is line that not necessarily describes edges. It is more about direction and motion. It is basically getting the essence of what's being expressed. So in this drawing, the gestural line was actually the oval, and then the contour line is being built up on top of that, and the form is starting to be described. But the overall shape that we began with, the movement, the direction, is the ovoid shape, and then things are built out from there. So gesture is movement, contour line describes edges of forms. Anytime you use a line, it will have a quality or characteristic to it. You can have really straight technical lines for like architectural drawings and schematics, or you can have more expressive lines which are used in drawings and things like that. And so line has quality, and the quality of line that is used will lend toward the overall function of what's being drawn, what's being communicated. And of course line has direction and length and location or position. It starts here and it ends here, where this one starts here and changes direction but ends here. There's vertical directions repeated, and then there's diagonal directions repeated. So a little more about line quality. If we look at the Charles Schulz drawing of Snoopy, we see that he is totally outlined, and pretty much everything is linear, even the scribbling in here, which starts building up the form. We see the shape of the glasses, but we understand that that was filled with line, and then the little kind of shape on the nose here was probably a couple lines really tightly drawn. So this is all enclosed line. So we have the shape of Snoopy, and he's looking very happy with his shades, and he's looking at Rembrandt's printmaker. I forget the guy's name, but this is a portrait of a very close associate of Rembrandt who uses line in a different way. Notice the line quality is a little bit jagged. He's actually drawn with a little bit of a shake to it, and this could, for a variety of reasons, but it is not a real clean, Adobe Illustrator vector drawing. It's definitely hand drawn, and has, even though the line weight, the thickness of it doesn't really change, there is some expression as we move around the form in terms of the line not being an exact, precise weight all the way around. And then Rembrandt, of course, this is an etching, which is inscribing lines or incising lines into a printing plate filling it with ink, wiping off the residual, and then putting the paper on it. So it's kind of like a two-step drawing. But notice how the lines are used to build up the idea of surface quality in the kind of robe that he's wearing, and also color. We see he's got a white collar. It's probably a Puritan sort back in the Baroque era. And but line is also built up to start creating a sense of shadow and shape. And we have some gestural lines out here, and so we see where there's been a lot of detail and contours and edges really well defined. And then here we have more of a gesture, just creating the architecture on the wall. This does not have a sense of being outlined. This is definitely outlined. We don't really see outlines here. What we see are forced edges. So we began with line, but by virtue of changing color and bringing in areas of tone, which are created through buildup of line, we actually have an edge-to-edge shape understanding, this being the shadow and this being the actual shape of the collar on the, what is that, a poncho that he's wearing? We no longer have the line visible. So that would be what we would call a forced edge, and that's an interesting thing to talk about. I'll move forward here a little bit. Actually, I'll go back. We'll get to that. Here we go. A forced edge is something that helps us create the illusion of volume. When we have outline, that's flat. That's a drawing. It's a cartoon. When we have line built up into shape so that the outline of a shape disappears and we have color in the shape, that is a forced edge, and that helps us start creating that illusion of volume. So when we're going for something that's really realistic, we're going to start with line and shape and build up tonality, and we're going to lose the outline concept. Right here we've got outline, but we've lost it here. And we've got outline here, but then we lose it here because of the fullness and the robustness of that shape right here. And then we pick up the outline again. So a forced edge is where there's the tone or the color that's in the shape actually blends with the outline color, eliminating the visual of the outline, and that gives us the idea of volume. Notice the human beings are indicated in a gestural sense. We recognize, human qualities in these figures. They're more than stick figures, but they're not detailed, they're gestured in. And there's gesture lines here, and gesture lines in the background. So this drawing, which is a drawing for a exhibit, an environment, uses both contour line, gesture line, and forced edges. More use of inscribed line. This is obviously a technical drawing, and the line quality is the same all the way through. It just changes in weights. In this Degas drawing, we have down here the hooves and pasterns and fetlocks and so forth, which are unfinished, really, where the upper portion of the horse is actually finished in terms of how the tone is laid in. So he looks three-dimensional and volumetric up here. Down here he's still a line drawing, he's still a cartoon. And notice the gestural lines indicating shadow and the ground plane and so forth. And there's even gestural lines up in here. So we have the fullness of the drawing, the fullness of the form actually almost looking sculpted out of the paper. At the same time, we see the just the outlines, the inscribed lines, creating the outline, and everything is really flat and just suggested here. Implied line is about alignments, and again, implied line helps organize space, helps organize so you can present information comfortably. You can help people navigate to where they need to go on a website and things like that. So just indicated here how alignments have been used in a couple of places. The baseline of your type is an implied line. So when you study typography, you will be lining all of your letter forms on a baseline, which is not visible, so it's implied. And you will be, again, aligning left, ragging right, that sort of thing. So implied line helps you organize the elements, helps you organize the information in your design so that it can be understood clearly by the reader or the viewer. These posters by David Lundgren use implied line to a great degree and emphasize the two-dimensionality by doing so. And in the third one over here on the right, I've actually picked out a few of the implied line relationships for you. In this piece of Chinese calligraphy, this is from several centuries ago. There is an alignment of the characters on a vertical axis. And here in this modernist poster by Mueller, there is alignment along a diagonal axis, a couple diagonal axes, but we understand a right angle and so forth. There's alignment here, and there's alignments of common directions. All the directions of the type lines here align with the shorter diagonals here, and we've got the longer diagonals here. So you can see that implied line is used not only in the 20th century, but it's used in like the 14th, 15th century. So different culture, different time, different purpose for the design, but the same aesthetic principles being applied. Better Homes and Gardens cover from the 50s, and notice obviously the repeating horizontals in here. There's a strong horizontality to the design in this design space. This is a medieval illuminated manuscript illustration from depicting the coronation of Charlemagne, and so this is from the Carolingian period. And notice the implied lines, the repeated curves. Notice this implied line here up into his hand. And just the relationships and the repeated curves going through, giving it a certain unity, pulling everything together. The echo of this with this, and the echo of this with this, and so forth. So the repeated curves, even the attitudes of the heads, and the psychological line is going on in here and so forth. But so we have many centuries apart the same aesthetic principles being applied. And between Edgar Degas in a landscape drawing, repeated direction in the tree line gives this a sense of it's windswept, it's kind of stark, the trees are leaning. Their trees are really tall, because by the time we get down there we're going to be really small and they're going to be really tall. So there's repeated diagonals here that give the whole drawing a sense of movement. Then in the William Morris piece, this is a surface design from the arts and crafts period. We have repeated flowing lines. And there's an upper left to lower right movement and direction that is repeated throughout the pattern. Psychological line. This, if you are in the LA area and can get to the Getty Center in the Sepulveda Pass, this painting is actually on display there. It's part of Getty's collection. But there's obviously implied line if you look at the triangular relationship of these figures and how things flow into each other. But look at the psychological line going on in the story it tells. This is a portrait of a family, obviously. And so we have the father looking at the mom, who's looking at the This could be a son or a daughter because they used to dress young boys in skirts in that era. But it might be a daughter. So looking at the child, she is looking directly at you, the viewer. So you are now part of this scene, this environment. And we have, the young one reaching for the tea cake or whatever, and the father is, I guess, looking at the child and bringing the finger of discipline on the tea cake thief. But anyway, so this gives you, through the way psychological line is used in this, the story about the family is being told, something's being communicated. And you can look for areas of implied line as well. There's a lot of them in this. This photograph, psychological line, the subject is looking directly out at the viewer, so there is a direct relationship being made. So say hi. And here, psychological line is also used to tell the story, to relate the characters and kind of actually characterize them, if you will. We have Huey doing his thing, and we've got the teenage girl rolling her eyes. Mom and Dad are kind of happy. He's kind of goofy, and he just is doing his own thing over here. So there's psychological line. He's looking, these three are basically looking out at you, the viewer. So again, say hello. Huey is doing his thing, and she is kind of echoing his sentiment, but in a little more mature, less direct fashion. So her psychological connection is with them, as is his, but these three guys are looking out at you. This was a photograph in Sports Illustrated. It actually documented a benefit women's rugby game. They were playing rugby in their prom dresses, and it was for a charitable organization. And look at the psychological line going on. Everyone is concerned about the rugby ball. And notice also the implied line. There's a real strong movement this direction, even picking up on the graphics that are on the ball. And then there's a movement this direction. There's actually a right angle coming in right there. So, and this is a photograph. This was not staged. This was not composed. This was captured. And so even in the moment of something, even in an image capture versus an actual image creation, you will have these issues. And it's this type of thing that makes a good photograph. Unifies. The aesthetic principles are brought to bear within the photograph, and it's just being caught. It's a moment in time, and it will never exist again except in the photograph. The textbook introduces the idea of explicit line, and there can be a little bit of confusion as to what that is all about, because it is more than just an outline or a line that actually is really visible against the background. Explicit line is any time something, there's a total separation of a form from the surrounding area. And with this Daumier drawing on the left, we see lines in the crowd in the background, we see lines on the cobblestone streets, and a few lines within the figures themselves, but they are explicitly separated all the way around. You could actually take your X-Acto blade or your scissors and cut these two figures out from the background. There is no part of them that merges with the background, so they are being indicated through the use of explicit line. They are totally separate from the background. And obviously this is explicit line in that the form itself is fully separated from the surrounding area. and we see the line all the way around. And again, we can cut it out like a paper doll. So explicit line is the expression of a line or an edge, because it does not have to be seen as an outline. It's an edge recognition, or it's a edge, it's a contour line that separates the form from the background from start to finish. The final analysis for Lecture 1 is to review. And so we'll look at William Morris, who was one of the fathers of the arts and crafts movement in England, and which influence later showed up in the United States. What do you see in this illustration? This is a book illustration for the Canterbury Tales, which Morris illustrated and designed and printed. So based on what we've talked about, what do you see in this image? Do you see implied line? Do you see psychological line? Do you see color and texture? Do you see an understanding of space? Do you see certain things in certain positions? So what aesthetic principles do you see being applied by the illustrator? There is a strong verticality going on through this entire piece. The major directional movement is vertical in this. There's a few horizontals, but the major direction is vertical. We have psychological line. She's looking at whatever this is over here. And obviously she's getting dressed, so she's probably looking maybe at a mirror, who knows, but she's putting her belt on. There is a implied line. There's other implied lines. There are implied lines repeated that are curving here, that are repeated here. There's counter curves here. There's counter curve here. There's texture and more texture and texture here, texture here. There's color changes all over the place. She appears to be in a foreground plane. The maid appears to be in the background plane. We have the bed in the midground plane, and so forth. So you can identify some inscribed lines that are actually helping to render the curtains and so forth. And in the pattern on her gown, there's inscribed line. There's an inscribed line in here. There's shape. Again, everything is very obviously there and recognizable. So the idea is, now that you know these things, start looking for these things in your everyday life. Do you eat cereal in the morning? What do you see on the cereal box? As you're driving to or from work, or to or from school, or to or from errands, whatever you're doing, look around you, notice signage, notice packaging, notice advertisements, posters, products, websites. When you're on your computer, how are things designed? What do you see? What do you recognize? And it's this ability to recognize and to observe, to look and to think about what you're looking at, and how was that made? Why did they do that? Why did the designer make this choice? Things like that. That's what's going to get you into the design thinking thing. That's what's going to get you to think as a designer. And so design is not a turn it on when you get to work, turn it off when you leave work. Design is basically a 24-hour 7 pursuit. 7 days a week. Everything you do, you should be looking at, and actually you will end up looking at from a designer. So your thinking is going to be changing as you go through this course. And that's a good thing.